about writing and the publishing process, because I started out as just a teenager who really liked to write. I think back, I just made a video today about my first time really getting into writing. I loved this magazine called Discovery Girls Magazine, and I wanted more than anything to get in the magazine. So I wrote this story about my struggles with Lyme disease, something that wasn't talked about very much at the time, and it wound up getting published, and publishing it would have been enough. But what was most rewarding was the editor wrote to me and said, like, you have a really strong talent in writing. She said it was one of the best stories that she had received, and to a 12-year-old, that affirmation meant so much. And then I started getting letters from little girls who read the magazine who were inspired by my writing, and I decided, like, wow, if I could inspire people with my writing, that's the reward I need. That's why I do this. So I kept on writing. I started writing for Scholastic magazine after that, and then I wrote my first book when I was in high school. It was a book about contests. And then when I got to college, I decided to write my own first kind of memoir. It's called Notes Never Sent, and I had self-published my first book. This one was published by a publishing company called VIP Inc. Publishing. And why I did this was I wanted to inspire people. So then after that, after getting my book published and going through the whole process of getting a book published, which is a very difficult process, and it seemed to me like a lot of the publishing companies make it needlessly difficult. It's a little bit more difficult than it should be. They take very long to get back to you. They don't respond to your query letters. There's a lot of struggle that they make the authors go through, and I didn't think that that was right. So I wanted to start my own publishing company for people who were my age, younger people, and since I was in college at that point, because so many of my classmates said to me, how did you publish a book at such a young age? I mean, it's difficult for adults to get published, but a college student, it's very difficult to get published. So I started this company for them, and we've now published 56 titles, all different genres. We had 6 bestsellers, and we're very inclusive. I mean, we only publish 10% of the queries of the books that we get queries on, but when we don't publish a book, we write to them and we tell them a constructive criticism on how they can improve, and we really try to guide them through how to succeed in their writing, because we never want to discourage anybody. So now with the GenZ publishing, it started out just me. It was just me and my love of books, and we've grown to have more and more interns and people working with us, and it's a lot of fun. It's absolutely great. So I want to talk about the publishing process, but and it occurred to me then, wow, that's true. People, they think that this book just, you write it and it manifests itself, but there is so much that goes into making a book. And even I was talking about this with Sarah before, that like there are a lot of steps. I mean, it starts out with the author. Some writers start out, there are 2 different kinds of writers. You have your architects and your planters, and your architects will go through and write an outline and draft everything out, whereas the planter just kind of starts free writing. I'm a little bit more like that, just a little bit. You just start writing how you feel. You write what you want to get out there on paper, and then they'll go through and they'll heavy edit. So it goes from that to constantly editing your own work, but then you have to start querying publishers, or if you self-publish, you have to figure that out. You have to do that. But in my case, they start querying publishers. So me at GenZ Publishing, we get that query and we read it over, and we decide, A, is this book for us, or B, do we want to give them constructive criticism and tell them this is how you can improve, and if you do this, we'll consider your manuscript. So if we do decide to publish them, then the book has to go through edits. So it goes to our editing team. They go through it once. We send it to the author. We say, okay, these are the improvements that we think you should make. These are the definite things that need to be done where there are grammatical issues, but these are the things that we suggest. We think that maybe this character should have, stronger characteristics, or this character seems a little bit too harsh. Things like that we go through with them. So they make those changes. Then they send it back to us, and then we go through another round of editing and revisions, and we have some beta readers read over the books and say kind of their opinions on it, if they like the characters, if they get along with the characters, if they like the setting. They go through, give their first impressions of what real readers would think. And then we design the book covers. We have some professional designers who do book covers. Sometimes I'll even ask an author. I have this one author who, she had a favorite artist on Etsy. And she asked me, would it be possible to have him design my book cover? And I said, absolutely, let's contact him, let's see if he would be interested in that. And sure enough, he was flattered that she was such a fan, and we signed a contract with him and he made the book cover. So from there, you have the book cover, and then there are a few other little steps like formatting, not a little step, but in comparison to everything else. And then we make the proof, and the proof is a really exciting time because that is the first time that the author gets to hold the book in their hands. So I physically mail out the proofs to people. Everybody at USPS knows me by name now because I'm always the one who goes in there and gives self-addressed stamped envelopes so that they can send the proof back to me so I know if there are any formatting changes, which needs to be weighed the same weight as the actual media mail. So we send that out, and then the author mails it back with any changes. I send them sticky notes, they sticky note it up. They email me with any additional changes because half the time they're like, oh, I forgot to say this when I mailed the book back. And then we make those final revisions and we set a release date. The book is in pre-order for 1 month before it comes out so we can promote it, because promoting is also a big part of having a book. And then the book is released, and it doesn't stop there because you constantly have to be promoting. You go to events, book signings, book readings. A lot of my authors, you know, they're writers and they are kind of shy, and they'll be like, do I have to do a reading? You know, and I say it's really, really important. You have to get out there with your book. You know, you won't regret it. There's nothing like doing a signing or a reading like this. It's really, really rewarding, and every signing is different. So that's really the publishing process in a nutshell. I think we can assume that we have a lot of writers here. So a bit about the writing process. So my book that I published, the first book published with GenZ, the first book that I published with GenZ was my guide to writing. And I just going through some common themes of writing. One of the biggest things that I tell writers is to show and not tell, because a lot of writers, they'll say something like, Mary felt sad. And if you catch yourself writing a word like felt, you want to go back and reevaluate. And instead of showing, instead of telling us that she felt sad, show us. So something like Mary wept in her room, looking at all the, you know, something. It's difficult to just come up with it, but you know what I'm saying. Instead of telling us that she felt sad, show us that she's feeling sad. So that's one of the biggest things. And another tip that I always give is to write what you know. A lot of writers will try to kind of write for a different kind of audience, and it's always really helpful to kind of think of who your audience is, think of who you're writing for. And normally I'm writing for myself, so when I wrote this, my main audience in mind was my older self, thinking, what would 30-year-old Morissa want to see? What would make her proud? Instead of writing for, you know, somebody I don't know, you kind of really have to have an audience in mind and write for them.
Yeah, I can completely agree with everything that Morissa said. You want to make sure your book's captivating, because if it's not interesting, then it's going to be hard to keep readers wanting to stay interested in your book. So everything that she said, like, you know your target audience, because you have to know who you're writing for, and you have to have their mind kind of for a second, like, will they be interested in knowing about this? And like, you have to make sure you kind of follow that path. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Another thing that I go through in my book is grammar. That's a huge thing, and a lot of people say, oh, I have an editor, let them take care of it. But one of the reasons why we don't accept certain books when we get a query is we'll read and they'll have just not very good grammar, and it shows, you know, where they are. If they don't have good grammar, then you think, well, then how did they develop their story? You know, if you don't take the time to know the basics of grammar, is your story going to be as developed as possible? So it's okay to have a typo or two. That's what editors are for. But if you're going to invest in writing, you should definitely make sure that you have all the grammar rules mastered. And if you don't, I mean, it's simple to just kind of go through. There are so many online programs and things just to go through the basics of grammar and knowing exactly what goes where. A lot of people, there are so many memes out there of 2, 2, and 2, you know, people getting those mixed up, people getting there and there mixed up, things like that. Those are things that, you know, if you still get some confusion with, go through and practice that. And that's just something that is a personal thing for me that we look through. And if an intern sees somebody mixed up there and there, they'll say, Marissa, I don't think they're quite ready. And I'll say, why? And they'll say, because the grammar isn't quite there yet. And I'll say, you know what, you're right. So we tell them that. We say, your story idea is great, but go through your grammar, fix that up. And that's definitely something that you notice.
And another thing that's really important with writing is details. We kind of just touched upon that, but like instead of saying she was sad, you want to say her face turned pink red, tears streamed down her eyes, she hid her face in her hands. Like that's so much more interesting than just saying she was sad. And that's how you really want to draw readers in. Another thing is to relate to them. People want to be able to put themselves in your character's shoes, and if you develop that ability to make characters more relatable, that's another more like enticing quality, attractive quality for your book.
So do we have any questions?
Any of the writing process or anything else you might be wondering?
What would you do with somebody like Sarah who already has the book done? She comes to you for help.
That's a really good question. I get that a lot, where people have self-published books. Normally, we don't publish books that have already been self-published just because the book is out there already. We want to do original books. I have made some exceptions, but normally we want original books. So we do have authors that have already self-published books, but they've written a new book. And another example is I have one author. She's like the sweetest lady in the world. Her name is Dr. Audrey. She wanted to be here today. She's also from New Jersey. Most of my authors are around the world. We have authors in Europe, Spain, the Philippines, I mean, literally everywhere in the world. And it's so funny when I get local authors. Dr. Audrey lives in Camden, and you know, this was a little bit far for her, so she didn't come here today, but she had published a book with another company, and then she came to us with an original new book. So we published the original new book, and then after that book was out for a year, she said to me, you know, the book with the other company, is it okay if I publish that with you? And we said, you know what? That's okay, because you have another book with us. But normally, we're all about innovative new books, something that people haven't seen. So, yeah. Yes?
What would you say is, you know, can you kind of go through like a timeline, you know, in terms of, say, you know, one book, you know, from start to finish? What does that look like? Is that a year process, a 6-month process, just to get a sense?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the writing process, how long it takes somebody to write a book, really varies based on the person. There's something called NaWriMo, something like that. You know, I know it when I see it online, but it basically stands for National Writing Month. So NaWriMo, yes. And what that is in November, every November, yeah, a lot of people will write their books. Our very first book by R.J. Rogue, he did that. He wrote his book Evanescence in 1 month during National Writing Month. So those people write their book in 1 month. I don't think I could do that. This book took me 2 years because I compiled a bunch of different letters and feelings and ideas and just was working on them so long. But some people, I would say the average person takes about 6 months to write a book. But it depends on your personality. It also depends on if you're an architect or a planter. But then the actual publishing process, when you go through an indie publisher like me, we always say 3 to 5 months because it takes us about 3 months to edit, then a month to format and do the proof, and then a month to promote. Traditional publishers can take up to 2 years, and self-publishing is pretty much up in the air. So.
Yeah, it really depends on the kind of person you are, I would say, to have your actual book written. Like with my first book here, I wrote it in 4 months after I got my short story because I was really determined and I just wanted to get it finished. But I was also balancing like 2 months of school, so I probably would have had done a little faster if school wasn't in the way. But then for my second book, which I just finished writing, the sequel to this one, it took me a lot longer because I was in high school, and high school had a lot of homework and I didn't have a whole summer break. But I did finish it over the last summer break, so it gave me more time. Any other questions?
Oh, we have other questions. Yes.
So tell me, you know, you were mentioning about the, and I have another question that's coming later too.
Awesome.
But you were telling me about the kind of the editing process. You sort of get, you know, kind of like the first draft and you send it back with comments, and that process goes back and forth. And I can imagine that could feel kind of like a jab for a writer because this is kind of like your baby, right? And so I'm wondering, how do you work with, you know, an artist, if you will, right? A writer, an artist, to kind of create that safe place so that it's really a collaborative process. I wonder how you would do that.
That's an awesome question, because I have had that issue. I had an author who was not happy with one editor. She thought that she was a little bit too strict with some of her critiques, so I gave her another editor, and it was the same kind of thing, where she thought that the second editor was too strict. So I had to actually explain to her, you know, these are not personal, and it made me realize, like, coming from that place, how I would feel if somebody critiqued my work, that it's not against you, and if you disagree with, you know, some of their constructive criticisms, these are, you know, objective. They're not set in stone. It's somebody's opinion. So if you disagree with what they're saying, you know, weigh it, but if you disagree that much, you don't have to take their suggestions unless it's something grammatical. But if they're saying something like, your character Sarah seems a little bit too depressed here, maybe make her happier, then that's completely, you know, somebody's opinion. So that I say to the author, you know, don't worry about that. A lot of authors, though, they kind of grow thick skin, especially if they applied to or sent queries to other publishing companies. They know what it's like to get rejected, because most publishing companies don't even write back to you if you're not getting selected. But if they do, it's something cold, just like, sorry, we can't accept your writing at this time. So they kind of get thick skin. So a lot of the time they'll even thank us and say, wow, you know what? Your editor was spot on with that. I never would have thought about that with Sarah. I think you're right. Sarah should seem peppier here. Something great just happened to her and she seems kind of gloomy. So it really depends on the personality of the author. I had another author write great poetry, and just the editor didn't quite get it. So, you know, it's subjective. So we had a different editor work on that. Every editor and their opinion is different, and that's why I try to tell them that, you know, don't ever take it personally. It's not an attack on you or your work. It's just somebody's opinion. Now, this person is a professional, so, you know, listen, hear it, but, you know, you also don't have to take it as gospel.
You definitely have to embrace it for feedback, because when you write, you're putting yourself out there. So you're going to get people who love it, but then you're going to have people who don't like it as much as you do. Like, I got so many great reviews about my book when I first got it out there, and then I entered a contest, and they responded, and it was like a professional review, and they're like, what are you doing here? Like, you got to just prepare, and don't take it as like an insult, take it as constructive criticism, and it'll just make you a better writer, and it'll just prepare you for future writing tasks.
Actually, that reminds me, that's a great point too, because the editor, you know, they are preparing you for when you get reviews, because reviews are huge. Reviews can make or break a book. We always try to tell our readers to remind them to review the books on Amazon and Barnes & Noble's website. And those reviews really are helpful, but sometimes the reviews aren't all that nice. Sometimes they can be very blunt, and sometimes, you know, you disagree with the reviews. I saw one review on my book and I was like, did they really think that? You know, it wasn't the nicest review. And that happens to all my authors. So when the editor points out those things, at least you're aware of them. Even if you don't disagree, even if you don't agree with them, at least you know, okay, well, maybe a reader might think that. So it's good preparation as well.
I have a question for both of you. Two separate questions though.
Okay.
All right, for you. When it comes to authors that query you that don't have like the greatest grammar inside the transcript, do you allow them to query back with a new review?
100%. We actually just did that. I'm not going to mention his name, but his book is coming up very soon. His first query to us, he had a great story. It was really spooky. I love horror books, but just the grammar wasn't there. And I said, I really love this story. The editors really love the story, but you gotta clean up the grammar. He understood, and he took 6 months, cleaned up the whole book, sent it over. It was like a completely new writer. It was really, really good. We said, we're publishing this, and it's going to be out next month. So, yeah.
Nice. All right, now for you.
Yes.
All right.
I have a question. What to you is the most difficult part of the writing process?
Okay, so I say the most difficult part is making sure you tie in all the ends together, because you want to make sure you know where you're going with your story, and how you want to have a plan kind of set in your mind, and getting that plan just perfect, it may take a few tries. Like when I started writing this book, I only had the beginning, and as I was writing, I figured out where I was going to go, and then just had to tie up all the loose strings. So I feel like setting an outline, that's probably most challenging to a lot of writers too, because it's good to get an idea, but to expand on it is like another story, basically. So what would you say the most difficult part about writing is?
To me, the most difficult part is probably realizing that no matter what you write, it's not going to be perfect, and stop trying to make it perfect. So I started kind of just writing almost stream of conscience, like a stream of consciousness, kind of writing that way, and then going back and saying, this isn't going to be perfect, this is just my thoughts, this is what's coming out there, and then going back and making it as perfect as it can be, but realizing that nothing that you do will ever be perfect. I actually had a great professor in my poetry class who would always tell us, you know, he won a Nobel Prize in writing. It was amazing, and he said that he still is not satisfied with his writing. None of it is perfect. None of it he even considers very good. It's just that's what's out there, and you have to pick your moment where you think that your writing is good enough to get it out there. And I find that to be the most challenging time of, you know, okay, I've edited this 5 times, is it good enough to go out there? You know, and to hear it from somebody like that who's so accomplished that even he says it's not perfect. I read my old books and I go, oh, I can't believe I got that out there. It challenges any author or any writer or anybody. And another thing, one of my most liked tweets was about how some writers are afraid to call themselves writers for the same reason that some artists are afraid to call themselves artists. That's something a lot of people struggle with. You know, if you write, you are a writer, and it takes a lot of confidence. So what I'm saying with this, knowing when to get your writing out there, it takes a lot of confidence to call yourself a writer. It takes a lot of confidence to get your writing out there. So that's something else. I try to really encourage people not to be afraid. I have a lot of friends who are very, very talented, people who went to school with me, who were English majors, who still haven't published anything. And when I say, why haven't you published anything? It's because they're afraid. They go, oh, my writing isn't good enough. I know their writing is really good. They don't consider themselves writers. They just enjoy literature. And I say, no, you got to get it out there.
So that brings me to another, oh sorry, I'll get to you one second. So that brings me to another point, nobody's perfect, we're all gonna make mistakes in our writing. So one piece of advice I would give to anyone who is interested in pursuing writing is to never get discouraged. There's gonna be people who are not as excited about your journey as you are. There's gonna be people who don't like your ideas, who don't like your writing. So my advice to you is to just keep going, because if writing's something you like to do, don't worry about what other people think of it. It's your goal, so you can chase it no matter what age you are. I wrote my first book when I was 14. Sure, a lot of people will be like, 14-year-old wrote a book, I can't take that seriously, like how good could it be? But you just gotta keep going, and I love to write. I got my dream, I made it come true. So no matter what age you are, no matter what's around you, who's around you, just go for it, because you have to follow your dreams.
I have to add to that. That was an awesome point, because my favorite author is Chuck Palahniuk. He writes a lot of really dark stuff, but he has a quote that you shouldn't publish anything until you're 40 years old, and I hate that he said that. I hate that my favorite author said that, because I think somebody like you, Sarah, you know, somebody who's young, all the authors at Gen Z who are young, who get their writing out there, who are really, really talented, they shouldn't be discounted. If you're a talented writer, you're a talented writer. It doesn't matter who you are, how old you are, where you're from. If you write and you enjoy writing and you have the talent or the drive it takes to be talented and to succeed, nobody should be able to take that away from you. And some people, same thing with me. When I was 17 and I self-published my first book, I had a lot of, oh, that's cute, you know, and it's horrible. It's a horrible feeling, because you know how hard you worked on it, and you know that this is your passion, that you have the drive to get it out there. So that's something else, that don't let people discourage you.
So we talked about, you know, what was difficult for you both in the writing process. What do you enjoy most? Like, what brings you joy the most in the process?
That's a really good question. I think thinking of, well, first it's probably getting the story out there, getting the emotions out there. I tend to be able to emote better in writing than any other way, and I get feelings out that I didn't know that I had, and that's a great thing. I'm going for my doctorate in literature, and I have a class called The History of Grief, and I said to the professor last week, you know, when you write, you're just really getting your feelings out in a different way. And I have another professor who said that it's a class on Robert Frost, and he said that the amazing thing about Robert Frost and his poetry is the fact that poetry is emotions written down. It's very difficult to describe words, and you know that you're a good poet when you can actually describe a feeling and have somebody feel that. So I feel like when I'm writing and I'm getting the feelings out that somebody else will be able to understand it, that's very rewarding. And that also leads me to my next great rewarding part of writing, which is knowing that I'm inspiring somebody, knowing that somebody shares the feelings that I did, or that somebody can understand what I'm saying and kind of has been there also. That's another hugely rewarding part of writing, and that's really why I got into it when I had that story published, and then I got letters from other girls. That was so rewarding. That made everything worth it.
My favorite part of writing has to be creating the characters and bringing them to life. I find myself like I put my own personality into the characters, but I also give them their own unique personality. So it's a really fun territory to expand with, like, oh, would Alex do that? Would Amelia say that? It's really interesting. And I find like it's when you get to express emotions through your character, it's really amazing. Like I've cried at some parts of my first book, and my second one I was like, oh, poor Amelia. And then I was like angry when Alex was mad at his father. I was like bashing on the keys, like, oh, I feel his pain. So that is one of my favorite parts of writing, like putting the emotions and designing your own characters, because you can make them whoever you want. And I also love to inspire people. A lot of people like said, wow, you're so young, you wrote a book that really makes me want to write. Here I'm already like going into my 40s, 50s, and I always wanted to write, but I never like looked into it. So it's really great to hear people say that they were inspired by something I did, and I love to inspire anyone from any age to follow their dreams. All right, well, thank you guys for listening to this talk. We had you here for a while. It was really fun to talk with Morissa.